NFL Combine is well underway here in Indianapolis, and there's no shortage of storylines that we can be reacting to that do directly and indirectly relate to your Miami Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and the NFL Draft Lead for the 33rd team. I want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. The NFL Combine, when it starts, it goes. And it goes until next probably Tuesday. And there's going to be a lot of action, hot and heavy, not just the prospects on the field, but league-wide news. And you're starting to get some league-wide news of teams that are granting players permission to seek out trades. You're going to start to hear some more momentum about player contract extensions getting done as we get closer and closer to the cusp of free agency. All of this process is started because there's teams, decision makers, coaches, agents, interested parties, all in the same place. And they're all here for an extended period of time with a deadline looming. And the dynamic that this creates across the league is this is one of the most unpredictable windows of NFL news that you will get throughout the course of the entirety of the season. It's like this and the NFL draft as far as just the unpredictable nature of what can happen because of everything happening at the same time. We're going to get into some of those player trade permissions. If any of those players are of interest to Miami, I think that list needs to be probably a lot more selective than some of the names that you see that you recognize that are well-established players and maybe not through into the late-stage chapters of their careers, but a lot of money involved. There's compensation involved for the team that you'd be pursuing that player with, and there's a lot of risk involved, right? Because if these players that are well-established names, if they didn't have the risk that they have, many of them would not be available, which is a part of the issue that the Dolphins are trying to mitigate this offseason amidst their own issues at the end of season the last couple of years with critical players not being on the field. So I want to start with some prospect news with a couple of Penn State guys that are of interest. The first one being Abdul Carter, who is not going to be a Miami Dolphin. let's just be honest, okay? And I know some fans have kind of had questions with the news of Abdul Carter last night that came out that he has a foot injury that may require surgery. But this is a player that the buzz overall is number one overall pick trending. Certainly top 5 pick. And I wanted to touch on it briefly because he had a shoulder that everybody knew that he had, and then he said he wasn't going to work out, and then he did his medical checks here in Indianapolis, and it's been reported that he has a foot injury and that he may need surgery that would put him down for 8 weeks, approximately, which would probably have him ready, if not for rookie minicamp, then regular team minicamp and OTAs late in the spring, early in the summer. So I want to touch on Abdul Carter to acknowledge, yes, he has an injury. No, that injury is not going to allow or permit him to fall anywhere into the stratosphere where there's a possibility this Miami Dolphin. So just mentally make the note amidst the injury stuff. But the Tyler Warren stuff is a little bit more interesting because I think he had grounds to really slam the door shut on his resume as potentially the tight end one. But Tyler Warren, it was revealed yesterday, is not going to be participating in the testing here in Indianapolis. And it's always interesting with the Penn State guys because Penn State has developed this reputation of being freakish athletes. Their strength and conditioning program is amongst the best in the league. You got guys like Gesicki that come through. You got guys like Micah Parsons that come through. You have safety Troy Apke who ran like a 4.3 flat. Like they always have guys that test extremely well. And I don't know that that was the expectation for Tyler Warren, but there's always the possibility of a Penn State guy just based off of their resume, Penn State's resume of developing these functional athletes, that he would have came in and performed highly above expectations for some of the tests. He's only going to be doing field work. And I will say one of the bits of buzz that you've started to hear a little bit more about is at two positions in this draft, at wide receiver and tight end, that the external world's consensus top player is maybe not necessarily such an open and shut case for teams behind the scenes, where you can consider Tet Arrow McMillan from Arizona at wide receiver, who has since August, July, been just, oh yeah, he's wide receiver one. That conversation's a little bit more open internally for teams. And I think you're starting to see that with why Tet McMillan starts to slide in some of these mock drafts into the late teens. You may see him slide even further. And then Tyler Warren specifically, who's a name of particular interest. And you could make it a note that depending on what the Dolphins end up doing with 10, that wide receiver's a position of particular note as well. I don't think the injury timeline does you any favors in that happening before the draft, but maybe you get into the draft and you decide to take a best player available that you feel is the best player available that's a wide receiver, and then it opens the door for you to take compensation and be more flexible to move on from 10 and whatever that looks like. But tight end, I think everybody agrees, like the Y tight end position, the inline player, it needs to be better than what it's been. And they obviously cut the weight of Durham Smythe already this offseason. But Colston Loveland has a lot of fans in the league. And I'm sure some of it's due to the toughness that he showed while playing with horrible quarterback play this year. He had like a very severe AC joint injury in your shoulder and played through it throughout the course of the season. And not playing at 100% with bad quarterback play and still looking like the receiving tight end that he is, whether or not he's a player that makes sense for the Dolphins with Jonnu Smith and his existence, were they going to can they budget long-term to continue to stay attached to Jonnu Smith, who's in his late 20s? He should still have plenty of good football left in him. But what does that compensation look like after Jonnu had the year that he had this past year, especially if he does it again next year in a contract year? Would they go for the receiving player and double dip at the position and find a wide tight end elsewhere when really there's not a lot of attractive options in the draft? I don't know. But the note being for Tyler Warren, we're not going to see him run and test. He'll do that at Penn State, and he'll do the on-field stuff only. And I'm a little disappointed. I want to see Tyler Warren run. I want to see Tyler Warren jump. I wanted to know what that athletic profile looked like. Because he is a player, especially with the position that he plays. Like, I like Tyler Warren a lot. On my personal board, he's a top 20 player. Is he a top 5 player like he is in some of the other NFL draft analysts boards? No. Do I think there's a world in which he could make a ton of sense for the Dolphins? Yes. Do I think he's an open and shut slam dunk case? You have to sprint the card in if he's there at 13? No, I don't. I think there's a lot of names that make sense, and I think that's kind of why I'm so excited about how this draft shakes out. A lot of players granted permission to seek out trades. We're going to explore some of those names here next on Locked on Dolphins. Stick with us. So you'll hear names like Harold Landry, Jaire Alexander, Deebo Samuel. And these are well-established NFL star talents at their respective positions. And all of them, the thing they all have in common is they have been given permission to seek out trades from their respective teams. This is impactful on the Dolphins on multiple fronts. First, you can take whatever you're hoping to accomplish with Bradley Chubb. If you thought the Dolphins could get a conditional 5th-round pick for Bradley Chubb, I got bad news for you. Probably not. If Harold Landry's also on the market, his sack numbers have been good, but the consistency as far as like the production from a pressure perspective and the consistency of pressure perspective, he's a little bit more of an outlier for he finishes some of the pressure perspectives that he has, but his disruption rate is nowhere near what his sack totals as a near double-digit guy would have you believe just by seeing the sack numbers there. So it's kind of disproportionate, the pressure to sack ratio for Harold Landry, which is going to be helpful for the Titans to try to get something for Harold Landry. But he's owed about $17 million this upcoming season. Bradley Chubb's owed 19.5 or almost 19.5. I don't think there's any way that you would get a pick that would make it worth eating the dead cap that's involved with eating $27 million in dead cap to move on from Bradley Chubb before the draft to get a pick for the draft and then saving $1.2 million against the cap. I just don't think that dead cap amount cross-referenced with what the edge market looks like and some of the other names that are available, I don't think you're going to have a market at all for a player in Bradley Chubb who did not play at all last year. Do I think Bradley Chubb, when healthy, is a better player than Harold Landry? Yes, I do. But he's owed more money. There's more red tape on his resume right now. It does not have the feeling of a player that's going to have a trade market when the trade market is looking like it's going to be pretty robust. And I would not be surprised if there's some action on that front because the free agency class in a lot of ways is I won't say unbecoming, but it's not super sexy. And there's a lot of teams that have a lot of cash to spend. And if you have a lot of teams with a lot of cash to spend and they don't have the players to spend it on, and the draft class in some key positions is perceived to be down, but then particularly deep at other spots, it could spur some player transactions. It could be more active trade cycle, I think, than the average year, I would say. But Jaire Alexander, let's start there. Packers, Dolphins have a need at corner. He's owed a lot of money. In the last 4 seasons he has played in, not missed, played in 7, 7, 16, and 4 are the games that Jaire Alexander's played in the last 4 seasons. He's played single-digit games in 3 of the last 4 years. Hard no. I don't care how good he is. He also had weird run-ins with the coaching staff. I think there was an internal suspension for a game for him in last year in 2020 or in 2023. Absolutely not for me. It flies in the face of everything you're trying to accomplish this offseason for Jaire Alexander. I would say the same about Harold Landry. You have a player who, if you were going to do that, you might as well just keep Bradley Chubb, right? So I'm not interested in Harold Landry either. Deebo Samuel, I would expect, just because of the wide receiver market and where Deebo Samuel's cash schedule is, I kind of think there will be a market for him. I don't know that it's going to align. The stars are going to align for the Dolphins to be involved in that, especially if you are trading for Deebo Samuel, because his cash breakdown and rundown this year, he's owed, what is it? It's a almost a $15.5 million option bonus. It's $17.5 million total for Deebo Samuel, and he's in a contract year as an age 29 wide receiver. So it's a 1-year rental. It's established as a 1-year rental. There's going to be teams that want wide receiver help, especially teams with young quarterbacks, be that New England, be that Washington. Those are a couple of destinations that I think wide receiver makes a lot of sense. I could see Deebo being a fit for Miami based off what he did when Mike McDaniel was on San Francisco's staff, but that domino, I think, has to fall secondary to something else happening first, which is Deebo Samuel is waived. and you can kind of start from scratch to negotiate a contract and have a selling point on, if you come here, we may move on from number 10. If you come here, the implementation with Mike McDaniel and that existing relationship would make a lot of sense. Or alternatively, I think somebody else is going to jump into that boat. And I think his presence does not help the market value for number 10 either, with him coming off of a low yield season from a production standpoint and not costing as much, and also being a 1-year rental, but being a 1-year rental with effectively $10 million in cash less owed to him than what the 1-year rental that Tyreek Hill would be, when you're presumably not going to pay him $36 million next year to play on your team on what will be the last year of his contract. So it's the market elsewhere is not doing the Dolphins any favors, I should say. There is one player, and it's not Devon Godchaux, former Miami Dolphins legend Devon Godchaux, who just seemingly, and for some reason, the Patriots have just continued to give these contracts to, including one 7 months ago. Like, he got a multi-year extension last year that features, from a cash perspective, it was 2 years, $13.5 million in new cash for the new money on the deal that he did with the Patriots. They've given him permission to seek out a trade 7 months after adding 2 years onto the back end of his contract. That's not the player I have my eye on, though. I do have my eye on one player, though, who's at least interesting, depending on what the free agent market looks like and how competitive the Dolphins can be in it. We're going to get into that next, in addition to hoping that the league shows some same energy for some stuff going on elsewhere with Matthew Stafford. We're going to get into that next. Stick with us. The name in question that has my interest, and I'm not saying yes, but I at least have interest, is Jonah Jackson. Jonah Jackson signed a 3-year deal worth $51 million with $34 million guaranteed to him last year with the LA Rams. Jonah Jackson, 28 years old. Jonah Jackson, formerly of the Detroit Lions. He was a 3rd-round pick in 2020 out of Ohio State. He played over 1,000 snaps his first 2 seasons. Then he played 858 snaps in 2022. And then in 2023, played 798 snaps. 13 and 12 games started combined. Then he signs in LA and gets a really robust contract. He got $25 million in cash last year because it was a significant signing bonus, a $17 million signing bonus. He had a salary that was the other $8 million. So it was effectively half of his 3-year contract total. The Rams paid up front for Jonah Jackson. And then Jonah Jackson played in 4 games last year. And the Rams in that process drafted Bo Limmer in the middle rounds of the draft, and he turned into a player that they feel comfortable moving forward. And now the Rams kind of have this sunk cost into the Jonah Jackson contract, where they have Steve Avila. They have Kevin Dotson, who they committed to. They drafted Bo Limmer. They obviously have an established tackle in Rob Havenstein at right tackle. Kind of incomplete what's going to go on at left tackle. They feel like a good left tackle spot in the NFL draft with some guys that may fall towards the end of the first round. Sunk cost with Jonah Jackson and a chance to, get younger, cheaper. And of course, he missed 13 games. Here's where I'm at with it, though. Jonah Jackson, his salary fully guarantees on the 3rd day of the league calendar year. That salary is $9 million. It's a decent amount of money, but it's not backbreaking money. And then Jackson has no guaranteed money left on his contract after this year's salary. So this could theoretically be a 1-year rental for a 28-year-old guard for $9 million. If the Dolphins strike out on the Will Fries of the world, on the Patrick McCarrys of the world. Those are names that have been associated. Will Hernandez has been associated. If you don't want to take the Achilles injury risk that comes with Kevin or James Daniels from Pittsburgh, who's another name that's been tied to Miami. This is a player is at a price point where, from a cap perspective, you can make it very friendly to make him be under a $4 million cap charge to play this year on $9 million. It is a roll of the dice, but it's also a better option if this player is healthy than many of the free agent options that are available. And as we know, this team kind of has a blind spot when it comes to drafting offensive linemen at times. So I would imagine with the cash that's owed, it probably being a 1-year rental for $9 million, with the injury concern that exists, you're looking at a mid-day 3 pick would be my offer. But if you get through the first wave of free agency, like I'm not saying make this deal now and get it locked in, but if you get through the first wave of free agency and you kind of come up empty, or if your first couple of targets get priced out because Trey Smith extends in Kansas City, what I might do if I were the Dolphins is I might circle back to this one and say, there is upside here for this to be a long-term fit for us. Is the 5th round. I'm going to do the 5th round pick at 155 or whatever it is that the Dolphins have. Because you can, if you're willing to accept modest value in return on a trade, you can snap your fingers and get that pretty easily in the draft on draft weekend. You can get a 5th round pick back. You move back 10, 15 spots in the 4th round. You move back 5 spots in the 3rd round. You can get a 5th round pick, right? Like it's not hard to get that kind of capital back. But that's kind of the one of all of the names that have been reported of permission to seek out trades. I think there's an intersection of need. I think there's an intersection of upside. I think there's an intersection of cost. I think there's an intersection of compensation. I think there's an intersection of scheme and language familiarity with playing with McVay this past year. Like all of that combines to maybe you explore this one depending on how free agency goes and how, if this market gets crazy, it might be a better option with a certain amount of risk. And players are available for a reason. There's risk with many of them that are going to be available in the market. So you have to be smart. I'm not saying trade for Jonah Jackson today, but I'm saying if you wake up in early April or mid-April and the guard market dried up and it got crazy and you weren't trying to pay Will Fries $15 million a season, if that's the kind of spending direction that it goes, I wouldn't blame you. But then Jonah Jackson for a 5 on a $9 million 1-year deal with potential to hang on to him long-term because he does have a 2nd year, but the cash is something you'd have to figure out beyond the 1st year of it. You got my interest. So that's the buzz. Now, I wanted to just touch quickly on this Matt Stafford, Tom Brady, Las Vegas Raiders saga. And I don't know what was permitted by the league. But if you're not familiar with this, Matthew Stafford wants a pay raise. Matthew Stafford apparently kind of interested in branching out and finishing his career elsewhere. The New York Giants and the Las Vegas Raiders are two of the teams that have, the Rams granted Stafford's representation permission to talk to teams to kind of gauge what his value is. Like, what would they be willing to compensate him? And it's been reported that there's teams out there that are probably comfortable paying him more than what the Rams are comfortable paying him to stay on the Rams. But the next chapter of that is the Rams then have to talk to those teams and figure out trade compensation packages. And there's still a lot of distance for this to cross the goal line for him to play somewhere else this year. What got reported yesterday that Tom Brady and Matt Stafford are hanging out in Montana skiing together. And it's very convenient that, Matthew Stafford, who just so happened to be at the same report as Sean McVay in Cabo when he was with the Detroit Lions, and they sat down and the story's gotten told about how they sat down and they really clicked, and then the Rams traded for him and put Jared Goff in the deal, and they upgraded a quarterback, and it became this big parade of brilliance for the Rams and Sean McVay, and that this match made in heaven, and they ran into each other in Cabo conveniently. But as you hear some of the details there, it's like, I don't know how much of this was convenient and how much of this was something that intentionally happened. And now you have a pattern of behavior with Matthew Stafford, where now he's going skiing with Tom Brady. And I just want to know, is the league going to keep the same energy for this, for the tampering? I have a hard time envisioning a part-time owner having the player himself at his residencies to go skiing, and then got reported, and then the big state media for the league was very quick to push back and say, no, it was just coincidental. Matt Stafford and Tom Brady just so happened to run into each other at the same ski resort in Montana, and they chatted it up because they were there. Sure, just like he conveniently happened to be at the same place as Sean McVay in Cabo, and it became a celebrated great story of a Super Bowl champion that was born, despite the fact that there was no permission from Stafford to talk to other teams at that point. From Detroit's standpoint, it was clearly, to some degree, tampering. And the only team that's ever gotten really punished for tampering, you had the Eagles and Falcons last year investigated for tampering with regards to Kirk Cousins and Saquon Barkley. The Eagles didn't get anything. Now you got Stafford, for the second time in as many opportunities to move on to a new place, going to meet people in places. Is the team granted his agent permission to talk to other teams? And I don't know if it does or doesn't. But I just want to know, is it going to be talked about at all? Is the league going to keep any of the same energy for somebody else that they gave the Dolphins for the goofy, egregious oversteps of boundaries that they did with Sean Payton and Tom Brady? Please, just humor me, NFL. Keep the same energy. I would love to see it, and I would love to see what happens. Will it? I doubt it. It's Tom Brady's involved, and it's Matthew Stafford. So probably not. Although the last time there was tampering and Tom was involved, a team did get slapped on the wrist. It was just Tom not doing anything wrong. It was the other parties that were guilty. So we'll see. That's going to do it for us here today on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Here from Indianapolis in the NFL Combine. I will have you covered again tomorrow with more news and buzz coming out of Indy. I look forward to it, and I hope to see you all tomorrow.